It's the 11th day of the Israeli and American bombing of Iran, and the US Secretary of Defense says today is to be the most intense day of strikes yet. Pete Hegseth making those comments during a briefing at the Pentagon this Tuesday, alongside the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, who said that more than 5,000 targets in Iran have now been hit. Now, in response, Iran is continuing to fire missiles at Israel and at the Gulf states of Bahrain, the UAE and Qatar, although Hegseth today claiming the number of Iranian attacks is tailing off.
Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, the last 24 hours have seen Iran fire the lowest number of missiles they've been capable of firing yet.
Well, to unpack that press conference by Pete Hegseth, I'm pleased to be joined now live by Dafydd Townley from the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. Hello to you and thanks for speaking to us here on Around the World.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Look, did we get a clearer sense then from the Secretary of Defense as to what America's strategy is 11 days in?
I would say no. I would say we certainly know very clearly what its military objectives are. Both he and Chairman Kane spoke about essentially the three main aims, which were to destroy any sort of capabilities that Iran has in essentially launching missiles at its neighbors and at any American targets in the region as well, to destroy the Iranian Navy and to degrade its military industry, because it's not just about being able to launch the missiles, but actually being able to produce them as well. So that's essentially the three main aims. Wrapped up within that as well is this notion that it's about trying to stop Iran gaining any sort of nuclear weapons, but that's sort of added on to those three main aims that have been there from the start. In terms of its strategic objectives, what Hegseth told us was a great deal of what the conflict isn't, or at least what the White House is aiming it not to be, which is a protracted conflict, one that is, as he mentions the word quagmire, for example, he mentions the word nation building. There was a lot of reflection back to the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by George W. Bush and the continued operation under Barack Obama. But like in a recent poll, 62% of Americans were still unsure of what the actual political objective of this operation is. Is it about regime change, because that's been achieved to a certain degree, or is this about getting the Iranians to come forward and sign up to some sort of nuclear deal? Because again, we're still not quite sure of that. Or is there a third option on this that we're simply not aware of yet? And so until we are fully cognizant of what's going on, I think we're still sort of trying to unpack what Hegseth and Trump and Kane are saying.
And look, Hegseth was asked very directly there, do the strategies of the United States here, the extent to which they're clear at all, align with the Israeli strategies? Let's just have a listen to what Hegseth said about that.
Israel's been a really strong partner in this effort. Where they have different objectives, they've pursued them. Ultimately, we've stayed focused on ours. But what Iran has felt is the power of the world's two most powerful air forces. In that particular case, those weren't our strikes, or that wasn't necessarily our objective. But the president has made it clear to those concerns that we're not getting pulled in any direction. We're leading. The president is leading. He's determining where we want to go, what the outcome will be, what the end state is.
So, Dafydd Townley, Hegseth saying there, look, the US is leading. We're not being pulled in one direction by Israel. Do you think that his argument there stands up to scrutiny?
I think it's the same with most coalition forces, that they do have political objectives that differ from one nation to another. I think ultimately both sides want to have essentially an Iran that does not offer a threat either to either to Israel but also to the wider region. In terms of how they achieve that, they will have shared objectives in terms of targeting, but in terms of strategic objectives, I think ultimately they're both trying to minimize the impact that Iran can have. Now, whether that is from the United States perspective, a sort of a broader geopolitical view, whereas Israel is certainly going to be focused on Iran's persistent threat to Israel as its neighbor. So Iran will pose a different threat to Israel than it does to the United States, and so they will have different objectives. That's quite standard in this sort of operation.
Well, let's talk then again, if we may, about what might happen next in terms of Israel and the US's sort of differing objectives. Donald Trump yesterday, the US president, saying, look, the war is, quote, very much complete. I mean, he's obviously under domestic pressure. We saw that turmoil on the oil markets yesterday. Could we then see a situation where America wraps this up in one form or another? Donald Trump sort of claims mission accomplished, whatever that means, and Israel keeps going.
This is a message that Hexet would continue to push forward today. You mentioned, that everything the United States was being done on its own timeline, that Trump would determine when the United States has met its objectives. Of course, I would suggest they haven't gone into this with a long-term campaign plan that lasts, several months or even several years. This is something that they want to do in terms of a limited strike. Remember, they've got November elections coming up, and the Republican Party are not going to want to be embroiled in a long-term conflict going into those elections cycles. So it's very unclear as to what the actual victory looks like. There's no idea what the exit strategy is in terms of how the United States withdraws from the region, what Iran looks like after the conflict. It would certainly need some sort of reconstruction. We can see from the pictures that there's already considerable infrastructure damage, that society has been affected in many ways. But I would be careful to suggest that this is, essentially the military side of this might be finished as far as Trump is concerned, but the political objectives are a long way off. To get an Iran that is essentially complacent, competent and au fait with what the Americans want is going to be a long journey to get to that position.
Right, and as has become painfully clear for the United States over the past 11 days, look, Iran is not Venezuela. I mean, it's an ideological regime, and even if you decapitate and kill the leader, the regime sort of hobbles on, and that does seem to be what we're looking at now.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are, even after 10.5 days of considerable bombing of the area and of cities, this is still going to be a nation that is ultimately resistant to American pressure as long as it can be. We've seen from not just the regime, but we've seen interviews with people on the streets, for example, that where they are able to get out on the streets, that they are still quite belligerent in their attitudes towards the United States. It's going to take a very long time to change generations of attitudes towards the United States and the West. And essentially, bombing, a nation is not going to change attitudes. It might change regimes, but it will not change the national opinion of what the United States and the West is to them.
And just look, a final question for you. If Trump does wrap this up, say mission accomplished and America's out, I mean, there's no guarantee that Iran stops its campaign, is there? I mean, we may well see more attacks on the Gulf, do you think, in the weeks ahead, irrespective of what Washington does?
Well, I certainly think that we may see a resumption of Iran-supported terrorism in the future. It's not necessarily, it might not happen in the next few months, might be a long-term plan. We might well see the resumption of issues regarding its neighbours over the long term. But, I mean, in terms of, this is started essentially because Trump has withdrawn from the nuclear deal back in his first term, because no longer was the United States able to monitor the progress or be able to influence the Iranian nuclear program. And so what we've seen instead is, rather than find a political solution, this Trump administration has used the military to try and gain their own position by essentially bombing Iran into submission. And that's not really going to work. We see, we were told last year with the bombing of the uranium enrichment facilities that this was the end of the Iranian nuclear program, but suddenly, less than 12 months on, it was a very real and clear and present danger to the United States.
All right, Dafydd Townley talking to us there from the University of Portsmouth. Thanks very much.
Thank you.